The curate in this story is the Reverend James Dennett, whose memorial in St Michael's Church remembers him as a faithful and assiduous pastor. Aldershot was his first as the parish curate. He was not yet 23, the son of a shepherd from Buckley Hard, near the New Forest. There the parish was in the hands of a single grandee. In contrast, Aldershot had no such all-powerful landowner. The young curate's appointment had required the approval of 4 yeoman farmers who had bought a 3 lives lease from the hospital of St Cross in Winchester. Moreover, they and the other landowners had customary rights of forage and turbary on the extensive common to the north and west of the village. Dennett's tenure at St Michael's began in April with a wedding and 3 baptisms. He conducted his first funeral in May, the child's death attributed to inflammation of the lungs. June was to feature 4 funerals and a wedding. Those burials included the master potter Charles Collins and a mother of 3 who had died from consumption. The parish rate book reveals that 35 of the 160 households in the village, 1 in 5, were owner-occupiers, many with small holdings. This widespread ownership derived from a customary structure of land tenure dating back to a time when the land was part of the hundred of Crondall, owned by the Royal House of Wessex. Later passing to the monks of the cathedral at Winchester, it had continued under the lordship of the church, surviving both the Conquest and the Reformation. 6 holdings accounted for just over half of the total rateable value. Charles Barron's freehold estate of almost 210 acres was the largest. It had originated as a lodge and park in AD 1154, when a royal hunting chase ran through the area. The curate was automatically a member of the vestry, the governing body for the parish. The meeting in April, chaired by Captain Newcombe, newly elected to the position. George Newcombe lived in the so-called manor house, close by the church. He had moved there in 1847, having sold his commission as captain in the 47th Regiment of Foot and married into a wealthy family. Charles Barron, a retired land proprietor from London, had chaired the vestry during the previous 10 years and had continued to serve as one of its 2 church wardens. Newcombe was newly chosen to serve as the other church warden. The vestry minutes do not disclose any prior discussion, but on June 16th application was made to enclose Aldershot Common. A notice soon appeared on the church door, stating that the enclosure inquiry would be held on July 7th. The commissioners issued a provisional order, setting aside 4 acres for the village green, 10 acres for the labouring poor, and a further 15 acres as endowment for a national school. The Dean of Winchester Cathedral would receive 1/15 of the total value in recognition of residual rights as Lord of the Manor. 5 days later, the Aldershot commoners registered their consent to the provisional order, securing the necessary 2/3 majority in terms of rateable value. Nothing, however, could happen until Parliament gave its approval. The last part of the process required an authorising act. At the start of that month, far away and seemingly irrelevant to the lives of the villagers, the Imperial Army of Russia crossed into Moldavia and Wallachia. That was the start of another process, one which would eventually lead to a war in the Crimea. The general in this story is Sir Henry Hardinger, son of a clergyman. A seasoned military commander awarded Napoleon's sword at Waterloo, he became a politician and a colonial administrator. Created Viscount Hardinger of Lahore in 1846, he was now Commander-in-Chief of the Army, successor to the Duke of Wellington, who had died the year before. Hardinger was part of a coalition government of Whigs and Peelite Tories intent on reform. As part of his reforms, Hardinger had arranged a temporary camp for large-scale military exercise. Held on Chobham Common, this was now in its 2nd month. With extensive review in the newspapers, there was an upsurge of interest in the military. In a letter dated 21st of July, Prince Albert had offered Hardinger support for the plan to secure a camp which could operate all year round, not requiring annual permission from Parliament. August was eventful. Reverend Dennett performed 3 more christenings at Matins on the first Sunday, all children of agricultural labourers. Sadly, there were 3 more infant deaths. Anne Bedford, aged 11 months, died at the edge of the village close by the common, her mother reporting teething convulsions. The infant Stephen Barnett, said to have had consumption since birth, died near West End Farm, the cause attributed to whooping cough. So too the death of another infant on the 17th, her high temperature due to teething. Meanwhile, the measure for the enclosure of Aldershot Common was amongst 27 parishes listed in the schedules of the Common Enclosure No. 3 Bill, with note that the enclosure would lead to a reclamation of a large tract of land now almost useless. The bill went through its final committee stage on Thursday the 18th. Parliament was to be prorogued. The government used Saturday the 20th as its last day of business. The Common Enclosures Bill gained parliamentary approval. There is no blue plaque at the Red Lion Inn to say so, but I recall my aunt telling me that General Hardinger had lodged there to write to Prince Albert recommending Aldershot Heath as a military camp. I also wrote to Windsor Castle and was delighted when the Royal Archives kindly sent me a copy of that letter. Dated Friday 26th of August, 1853, Hardinger writes, "I have ridden over the ground this morning, admirably adapted for the encampment of 10,000, reserving all the ground to the west for the purpose of manoeuvres." Viscount Hardinger also wrote to his Adjutant General confirming that the ground around Aldershot is excellent for our purpose. Despite a seat in the Lords, his busy schedule as Commander-in-Chief meant that Hardinger was not engaged in parliamentary business. Neither he nor Prince Albert were aware that the measure to enclose Aldershot Common had been amongst the documents that the Queen Victoria had signed into law. Strong winds that September swept across the country from the west, with serious upset to the hops which had importance for the local economy. To add to village woes, the whooping cough epidemic continued. First, the young curate oversaw the burial of the daughter of the widow who had tended the sickly infant Stephen Barnett. Then Mary Porter, only 6 months old, died of the disease. A boy, barely 4 weeks old, yet another victim of whooping cough, would be buried at the start of October. Nationally, cracks began to show within the coalition ministry. General Hardinger faced risk that the government might lose its majority. Viscount Palmerston favoured a hard line against Russia and was unhappy with the stance taken by Prime Minister Aberdeen, despite dispatch of the fleet to the east of the Mediterranean. Mindful of the need to prepare for hostilities, General Hardinger attended meetings convened at the Home Office, which was responsible for the militia. He would later note that he had mentioned Aldershot as the best adapted for troops in peace and in case of war. By chance, when reading his Saturday newspaper, Quartermaster General Freeth noticed his mention of Aldershot buried in a list of parishes to be enclosed. He appends a clipping from the Times to a letter he then sends to his Commander-in-Chief. General Hardinger was spurred into action, meeting the Chief Enclosure Commissioner the following Friday. William Blamar was keen to help, but urged need of political cover for any actions that he might take. Hardinger then writes at length to Palmerston, who, as Home Secretary, was personally responsible for the enclosure legislation in Parliament. The letter, polite and courteous as one member of Cabinet to another, begins, "My dear Lord Palmerston." With an undercurrent of frustration, Hardinger gets to the point, urging purchase of Aldershot Common. He refers to a memorandum he is drafting, which he completes and dates on Monday the 26th of September. Hardinger also pens a short note to Adjutant General on Wednesday declaring, "I fear that we have lost the Aldershot ground." On the international stage, Turkey declares war. Prime Minister then writes to Palmerston in favour of acquiring Aldershot Common. Further support comes from William Gladstone, indicating that the Treasury was prepared to put proposals for funding before Parliament. Assistant Commissioner Wetherell was dispatched to the Red Lion Inn. The first meeting on October the 26th, nominally to appoint a valuer. There to observe the reaction of the government's plan to purchase Aldershot Common, his lengthy report to the commissioners notes attendance by about 30 with rights. From the conversations he had, they were in favour of selling on fair and reasonable terms. The meeting was adjourned to Tuesday, 15th November. Across the village, days ever shorter, farmers and cottagers prepared for winter. It had been a poor harvest, quality variable and volumes low. The sale of the common offered prospect of an alternative source of finance. Wetherell's account of the meeting with the landowners on November the 15th is again detailed, but also surprising. 5 of the commoners, representing £265 of the rateable value, objected to a sale under any circumstances, the dissenting voice with the largest financial interest being Captain Newcombe. the newly elected chair of the vestry. Perhaps with his military experience he could foresee how a camp might upset the idyll of his retirement. The others, objecting, owned lands close to the common. 20 other commoners present assented to the sale. They represented £1,063 of the rateable value, about 54%, 13% short of the required two-thirds majority. However, well over a quarter of the value of the common right property was unrepresented at the meeting, including land controlled by the vestry. December was a long but busy month. The situation in the Black Sea worsened, 6 Russian ships destroying a Turkish squadron in the port of Sinope. Britain was not yet at war, but a national mood of outrage was developing towards Russia. On Wednesday, December the 14th, Palmerston submitted his resignation, seemingly in opposition to proposals for electoral reform. The Hampshire Chronicle carried 2 advertisements relating to the enclosure. One was on behalf of the enclosure board, the other by the valuer, for January the 7th, both to be held at the Red Lion Inn. In the village, Reverend Dennett had to oversee the burial of yet another infant. On December 22nd, Hardigan attended Gladstone's meeting with the War Department to finalise the ordnance estimates to put to the new session of Parliament. On Boxing Day, the Prime Minister wrote to the Queen confirming Palmerston's return to the Cabinet. The government would survive. The Gazette announced prorogation of Parliament now extended to January 31st. To close off this story, in February 1854 there was an increase of 25% in military expenditure, £100,000 earmarked to buy land at Aldershot. In March, Britain joined with France to declare war against Russia. That same month, Charles Barron replaced Captain Newcombe as chairman of the vestry. The two-thirds majority in value then secured, the commoners later settled on a sale for the equivalent of £12 per acre, the Ordnance Survey agreeing to pay for new roads. The general, promoted to the rank of Field Marshal in 1855, lived to see the camp open in May, but suffering a stroke, Hardinger died in September of the following year. James Dennett married in 1855, but the curate would count as many as 59 burials in the parish register that year, 29 from June registered Aldershot camp. By 1857, a health board inquiry noted almost twice the number of dwellings, at 308, 50 more under construction. 43 were beer houses, now serving a population which had more than doubled, reckoned to exceed 2,000. There were new opportunities for the villagers in the garrison town, but the agricultural and nice, productive little parish, as William Cobbett had once mused, would become just a memory, and later the subject of this one-place study.